This is Chapter 6, Ripples in Still Water, from Book 2, The Awakening of Main Street. The late afternoon light filtered through the narrow windows of the community center basement meeting room, casting long shadows across the folding chairs arranged in a circle that had seen better days. Tariq Al-Rashid stood before a small mirror mounted on the cinder block wall, adjusting his collar with nervous precision as someone who had learned that appearances mattered more than his comfort in his adopted homeland. His reflection showed a man caught between worlds. The carefully groomed beard that honored his father's traditions. The modern glasses that marked him as American educated. The worry lines that had appeared around his eyes since he'd begun this impossible task of making strangers laugh while teaching them to think. The comedy workshop was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes, and he already could hear footsteps echoing in the stairwells as the students arrived. 8 people had signed up for Finding Your Voice, a workshop in conscious comedy, a title that still made him wince with its grandiose promise. When the community center coordinator had asked him to describe the class, he'd stumbled through an explanation that comedy could be more than entertainment, that laughter could serve an awakening, that humor properly applied could help people see through their own self-deceptions without destroying their dignity. Now, faced with the actual responsibility of delivering on those claims, he wondered if he had promised more than he could possibly provide. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother in Arabic. "Your cousin Jamal is getting married next month. His comedy shows are very successful. Why don't you perform at proper venues instead of teaching strangers in church basements?" The message carried undertones that didn't require translation. Disappointment, disguised as concern, love expressed through comparison, the gentle but persistent pressure of family expectations that had followed him across an ocean in 3 decades of American life. Tariq deleted the message without responding, but its weight settled into his chest like a familiar stone. His family never understood why he had abandoned the engineering career that had justified their sacrifice in immigrating, why he'd chosen to pursue something as frivolous and uncertain as comedy. They understood service to community. They understood work that put food on the table and money in the bank. But comedy as a spiritual practice, humor as a tool for consciousness development, these concepts existed in a language they had no words for. The first student descended the stairs with the careful steps of someone unfamiliar with the building's layout. Margaret, a retired teacher who'd signed up because she wanted to add some lightness to her volunteer work with seniors. She was followed by David, a software developer, who'd mentioned during registration that he struggled with social anxiety and thought comedy might just help him connect with people. Then came Jennifer, who managed a nonprofit and believed that humor could improve her staff meetings, and Robert, who worked in customer service and just wanted to find ways to diffuse tension in situations without losing his sanity. As the circle filled with faces that carried the particular vulnerability of people who'd paid money to learn something they weren't sure could be taught, Tariq felt the familiar flutter of stage fright mixed with something deeper, the fear that his own awakening wasn't complete enough to guide others. Margaret settled into her chair with the practical efficiency of someone who'd spent decades managing classrooms, but her eyes held the cautious hope of someone ready to try something new. "I have to admit," she said, with the directness that seemed to characterize everything about her, "I'm not sure what conscious comedy means, but I like the sound of it better than the other workshops they had on offer." David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his engineer's mind clearly struggling with the imprecision of the whole endeavor. "I should probably mention I've never done any kind of performance before. I can barely tell jokes at dinner parties without messing up the punchline." "That's perfect," Tariq said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. "We're not here to become performers. We're here to discover what happens when we stop performing and start being authentic in ways that happen to be funny." The words emerged from someplace deeper than his conscious planning, and he felt a warm recognition in his chest. This was what he meant to say, what the class was actually about, even if he hadn't fully realized until the moment he spoke. Jennifer leaned forward with the focused attention of someone accustomed to extracting practical value from every situation. Can you give us an example? What does authentic humor look like compared to regular humor? Tariq paused, feeling the weight of 8 pairs of eyes waiting on him to demonstrate the thing he'd promised to teach. Well, this was the moment he'd been dreading, the point where he'd have to move from talking about conscious comedy to actually embodying it, where his own authenticity would be tested in front of people who were depending on him to know what he was doing. Okay, he said, allowing his uncertainty to be visible rather than hidden. Here's the thing. I'm supposed to be teaching conscious comedy, but honestly, half the time I can't tell the difference between being conscious and just convincing myself that my neuroses are actually profound insights. The admission hung in the air, more vulnerable than he had intended to be so early in the workshop. But something in the room shifted. A relaxation in postures, a softening around the eyes, the subtle change that happens when people recognize shared humanity instead of performed expertise. Margaret nodded with recognition of someone who'd navigated her own vision of between worlds existence. I spent 40 years trying to be funny enough for the teacher's lounge, but serious enough for the principal's office. Never quite got either one right. David's laugh was surprise and genuine. I've been trying to be technical enough for my programming team, but personal enough for client meetings. Mostly I just end up confusing everyone. Okay, Tariq said, feeling something unlock in his chest. Now we're getting somewhere. What if the comedy isn't about being funny enough for anyone else? What if it's about being so honest about your own confusion that other people recognize themselves in it and laugh with relief? Jennifer looked intrigued. You mean making the struggle itself funny instead of pretending we all have it all figured out? Exactly. Watch this. Tariq stood up and began pacing in the small space at the center of their circle, his movement carrying the energy of someone about to risk something important. So I'm supposed to be teaching you conscious comedy, right? But here's the thing. Half the time I can't tell if I'm being conscious or just convincing myself that psychological patterns are actually profound insights. He adopted the exaggerated posture of someone deep in spiritual contemplation, stroking his beard with theatrical seriousness. Like this morning, I spent 20 minutes meditating in the nature of laughter as a spiritual practice, very deep, very meaningful. Then I realized I was mostly just trying to avoid calling my mother back because she wants to know why I'm not married yet and why I'm wasting my education on silly jokes. Laughter that rippled through the circle di- was different from the polite workshop chuckling, warm, more connected, carrying the recognition of shared human experience. Tariq felt his own tension begin to dissolve as he found his rhythm. The place where his cultural background became a resource rather than obstacle. And here's the really funny part, he continued, his voice finding the cadence that had made him effective on comedy stages, but now carried deeper purpose. I keep trying to figure out how to honor my family's values while following this path that makes no sense to them. So I practice what I call stealth spirituality. I meditate. I tell them I'm thinking about business opportunities. I study consciousness development, but I frame it as professional training. I come to teach workshops like this, but I tell them it's networking. Robert was grinning now, his customer service wariness replaced by genuine engagement. I do the same thing with my self-help books. I read them in the library bathroom stalls so nobody sees me trying to improve my life. Yes, Tariq felt the energy in the room shift into something collaborative rather than performative. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The comedy isn't in pretending we have it figured out. It's in admitting how ridiculous our strategies are for trying to figure it out. Beautiful, he said. Notice how that landed. We're not laughing at Robert's secrecy. We're laughing with recognition at the beautiful absurdity of human beings trying to improve themselves while being afraid to be seen, trying to improve themselves. How many of us have our own version of bathroom stall self-help? Hands went up around the circle, and Tariq felt something click into place. This was what conscious comedy could do. Not perform transformation, but create space for people to recognize their own humanity with more greatness and less judgment. Let's try something, he said. I want each of you to share one psychological pattern that you recognize in yourself, something that usually causes you suffering or embarrassment, that you're willing to explore with humor rather than shame. The key is to present it not as a confession or a complaint, but as a fascinating quirk of human psychology that happens to live in your particular nervous system. Margaret raised her hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to volunteering first. I'll go. I have this pattern where I recognize things when I'm anxious. But not just normal organizing. I alphabetize everything. Last week, I alphabetized my spice rack. Then I alphabetized my books. Then I started alphabetizing the contents of my refrigerator. I got as far as arranging the vegetables before I realized I was trying to control my anxiety about my daughter's job interview by controlling the placement of condiments. The sharing was met with warm laughter that carried recognition rather than mockery. David immediately raised his hand. I debug my code when I'm stressed about things that have nothing to do with programming. Last month, I spent 6 hours fixing indentation in perfectly functional software because I was nervous about asking someone on a date. As each person shared, Tariq felt the room transform from a collective of individual anxieties into a space of shared humanity. The laughter wasn't covering up or dismissing the struggles. It was carrying space around them, allowing people to relate their own psychological patterns with more lightness and less identification. Jennifer looked around the circle with growing understanding. It's like we're all members of the same secret society, the society of ridiculous coping mechanisms. And now we know we're all members, Tariq added. We can help each other recognize when we're taking our membership too seriously. The workshop continued for another hour with exercises that explored different aspects of conscious humor. Finding what was universally funny about specific cultural experiences, practicing self-compassion through gentle self-observation, learning to distinguish between humor that connected and humor that separated. By the time they were ready to close, the basement meeting room felt less like a church basement and more like a laboratory for human connection. As the students picked up their notebooks and prepared to return to their regular lives, several approached him with questions that indicated real engagement rather than polite curiosity. But it was Robert's comment as he headed toward the stairs that stayed with Tariq as he cleaned up the meeting room. You know, Robert said, when I signed up for this, I thought you're going to teach me to be funnier. Instead, you taught me to be more human, which turns out to be funnier than trying to be funny. After everyone else had left, Tariq sat alone in the circle of empty chairs, feeling something settle into his chest that he recognized as alignment. The afternoon's work had been different from anything else he'd done before, not stand-up comedy, not therapy, not teaching in any conventional sense, but something that integrated all of these approaches in service of awakening. His phone buzzed with another message from his mother, this one including a photo from his cousin's engagement party. The image showed Jamal on stage at what appeared to be a comedy club, surrounded by laughing faces and professional lighting. The accompanying text read, "See how happy he makes people? This is good work. Bring joy to the community." But as Tariq looked at the photo, he found himself noticing something his mother probably hadn't intended to highlight. The laughter in the office, or the laughter in the audience looked different. from what he had witnessed in his workshop. More passive, more consumptive, more about being entertained than being transformed. There was nothing wrong with entertainment, but there was also nothing particularly conscious about it. He typed a response in Arabic. I am also bringing joy to the community, Mama, just in a different way. Then he added in English, comedy can heal hearts as well as bring laughter. He sent the message before he could second guess it. Then he sat in the quiet of the meeting room, processing the day's work. Something had shifted for him during the workshop, not just in his understanding of conscious comedy, but in his relationship with his own cultural identity and immigrant experience. Instead of being obstacles to his spiritual development, these aspects of his background were becoming tools for service, ways of bridging different worlds and helping others recognize their own between worlds experiences. Walking home through the city streets as evening settled over the urban landscape, Tariq carried with him new understanding of what it meant to be a cultural bridge and wisdom transmitter. His humor wasn't becoming less funny as it became more conscious. It was becoming more genuinely funny, more connected to the universal human experience, more capable of creating the kind of laughter that healed rather than just entertained. The workshop had just been the beginning, he realized. There would be more students, more opportunities to explore the intersection of consciousness and comedy, more chances to demonstrate that awakening didn't require abandoning one's cultural background, but rather finding ways to put that background in service of something larger than personal success or family approval. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Thank you for today. I alphabetized my medicine cabinet this evening, but this time I was laughing when I did it. Somehow, that made all the difference. Tariq smiled as he walked through the city lights, understanding more clearly than ever that the ripples of conscious work extended far beyond what could be measured or observed. Every moment of authentic connection, every instance of shared laughter that carried recognition rather than separation, every opportunity to help people relate to their own humanity with more gentleness. These were building blocks of collective awakening. Tomorrow there would be another workshop, another opportunity to explore the endless possibility of conscious comedy. But tonight he carried with him the satisfaction of work that served something beyond entertainment, something beyond personal success, something that honored both his individual gifts and his connection to the emerging community of practice that was taking root in the city. The ripples in still water were spreading outward, carrying with them the laughter that heals, the recognition that connects, and the possibility that consciousness itself could learn to express itself through joy.